Chinese dairy industry. So to start off, I'll introduce my team. My name is Trishul, and that's Vetra, and here is Mali, and Nikhil, and that's Akrant and Nakul. To start with the agenda, this is what we'll be discussing today. We'll have a brief introduction, then I'll pick up the global dairy industry, look at the dairy industry as a whole, and then Miley will introduce and show some values about the dairy industry in China. And then Nikhil will talk about the competitiveness of the Chinese dairy industry, and then Nakul and Akrant will talk about the challenges and opportunities. Then Vedra will take the changing dynamics of the global industry from a technical perspective as to what can change and how it can influence the dairy industry, and of course then conclude. So the introduction, dairy is one of the fastest growing markets in Asia. So as such, it has a huge contribution to make to Asian countries' GDPs, and so we want to talk about the economic importance of dairy. So in this report, we'll be talking on the global dairy supply and demand, how dairy industry is internationalized. We'll also briefly touch upon imports and exports, and as I said, we will talk about competitiveness, and Vedra will talk about the changing dynamics. The main goal of the presentation is to bring out the economic importance of the Chinese dairy industry. So, what's happening around the world? So these are the world's largest exporters of dairy. So it's important to note that these are not the largest milk producers of the world. So largest exporters, and I've just considered whole milk powder and butter and cheese as the main dairy products to plot this. So as you can see, New Zealand, you know about New Zealand and dairy. So New Zealand is one of the largest exporters, and there is the close Australia, and then the European Union, United States, and Argentina. So just remember this, we'll come back to this. So if you look at the global dairy industry, what's actually affecting milk production, right? Milk production, there are a lot of things that can affect, there are a lot of factors that can affect milk production, like even there could be trade barriers, so even countries could be protective of their own domestic farms as well. So there are also weather implications, and milk is also very susceptible to contamination, and there's also some diseases that could affect, and the customer perceptions could also change. So I have a few examples here. There's Russia's food import ban that Russia put up against the sanctions, economic sanctions that were there, and it's mainly focused towards US and the European Union. So it just contains dairy as well. It's a general food import ban. And then India has a long-standing dairy import ban on China, and it's just about to be revisited. It's till the June of mid this year. So it was originally imposed during the 2008 melamine incident, if you remember, long back. So it's just been pushed around, and it's still continuing today. And Mexico had a dairy import ban on Colombia during the foot and mouth disease. And last year, the second half of New Zealand dairy production was low because of cold weather in New Zealand. Same goes for Germany and France because of adverse weather. The production of milk was lower. So just some statistics of how the future of dairy looks. So I've just taken the next 10 years. So I just want to look at these four main characters now. When you consider trade, demand, supply, export, and import. So looking, so the global milk production is projected to grow by about 22% in the next 10 years. So if you see, 1/3 of that 22% is expected to come from India and Pakistan, and about 70% of the entire production will come from Asia. Well, on the consumption side, you can see that the consumption So also if you consider exports, currently 80% of the exports come from the developed countries that I showed you in the previous slides, such as New Zealand, US, and Australia, and it is expected to grow to 82% in 2027. So if you see this 80% to 82%, just 2% growth in the next 10 years. So why is that? It's just some questions that pops into your mind. So what about the rest of the milk produced? The global milk production will grow by 22%. And where is the demand coming from? The demand is supposed to grow by 3.8% annually, about 34-35% in the next 10 years. So where's the demand coming from? So why doesn't exports grow by a large factor? Like why is it just 2% in the next 10 years? So as you can see, the two statistics are provided here. It will come from India and Pakistan, 70% of which will come from Asia. So both the demand and supply will come from Asia. So, but why doesn't it add to the dairy exports? If you consider the exports, developed countries are already saturated, they're exporting enough. So whatever production that happens within Asia, like countries in China, will go into becoming self-sufficient. Like these countries want to become milk. Their milk deficit, they want to become self-sufficient. So that's why it doesn't have a huge impact on the exports. So now we'll talk about the importance of dairy industry in China. So maybe we'll take over.
Thank you. Now we'll discuss the importance of China's dairy industry, but before that, it's worth noting that China is a very important emerging market that is fast becoming a major player in the global market. In 2016, it was the third largest recipient of foreign direct investment, and it was also the top exporting economy. China not only attracts foreign investors, but it's also increasingly engaged in outward foreign direct investment. Chinese firms started emerging in early 2000s, and in reference to the Fortune Global 500 list. In 1960, there were no Chinese firms in the 500 list, and fast forward to 2010, there were 61 Chinese firms. Now, specifically looking at the dairy industry, China's market share increased by 7.5% in 2016 as compared in 2017 as compared to 2016. This accounts for 9.1% of the global dairy production. Even though China holds a very small market share of the global dairy industry, its demographics are increasing, and this creates additional demand for dairy. Factors such as rapid urbanization, steadily growing middle class, increasing population, as well as increasing disposable income are driving the demand for dairy in China. This makes it an important emerging market for dairy, and is further supported by the increasing number of multinational firms that are investing in China's dairy market. Now, looking at the domestic dairy production in China, there are over 2 million meat producers in China. This ranges from local farmers owning a single cow to large firms that are farming thousands of cows. With that, it scatters the milk production from rural to urban areas. The government is also involved in China's growth for dairy production, in the sense that they provide financial support for dairy producers, as well as providing subsidization. An example would be China's Dairy United. It is one of the fastest growing and most innovative Chinese dairy producers. This company leases cows from local farmers, giving it access to its primary resources without a large upfront investment. transform Chinese milk production from a backyard and labor-intensive activity to a more industrialized mode of farming. So the key takeaway from this is that with the right structure, innovation coupled with positive policy reforms from the Chinese government, China will become a dairy farms in China become a potential force to be reckoned with in the global dairy arena. And with that in mind, I'll now pass it on to Nick to talk about the competitiveness of Chinese dairy.
Thank you, Madhav. I'll be taking over for competitiveness and the Chinese dairy firms in the Chinese market. So first, what is the competitiveness for Chinese dairy firms? That is like PRC, that is the Chinese government has already given so much of benefits for their dairy farms since 1980s, and the PRC government always supplied with crossbreed cattle, technological support, and also subsidies, and providing low interest rate funding, which enabled the domestic firms to move further. Second, when it comes to PRC promotional programs, the People's Republic of China's government also promoted certain programs called Vegetable Basket Project and School Milk Program, which made sure that to ensure the knowledge about nutrition in the Chinese community so that the consumption of dairy products would make a better nutrition effect on their health. So that's the reason which increased the demand in the Chinese dairy market. Then comes the urbanization. When since 1980s there have been a lot of improvement in the Chinese market, because China being one of the biggest emerging market in the world right now. So it is coming up with great transportation facilities, and also it is having a great increased standard of living, which gave access to the domestic firms, that is Chinese domestic firms, to enter the untapped dairy market, that is the rural areas. Then comes the government rules and regulations, which has been always supportive for the domestic firms, because Chinese government supported their firms more than the foreign incumbent industries already present in their market, because they were allowed to enter any sector or any region, whereas the foreign firms didn't have that. So that gives them a substantial competitive advantage there. Coming to the graphs here. So if we see the first graphs, where we can see that China's total infant formula market was $12.5 billion in 2013, which is dominated by all these Chinese firms except for one or two, that is Nestle South Africa and Abbott Laboratories. But this demand, this monopoly fell when there was a scandal in 2008, where you can see that domestic consumption fell, even the total supply fell, but there is a huge increase in the import of dairy products from other countries, which clearly states that the Chinese community lost their trust in the domestic market and the domestic dairy firms, which increased imports. And to get back this competitive advantage for the domestic firms of the Chinese industry, they had to think about something else which can be not done inside the Chinese market. So Chinese giants, that is Yili and Yashil, in 2013 decided to enter New Zealand, to gain the competitive advantage back in their domestic market. So they did acquire Oceania Group in New Zealand, and the whole concept was to export everything back to China, which would be like most of the Chinese people were wanting imported products of dairy, so that gave them a competitive advantage back. So we can see that there is math-to-cellular linkage, leverage, and learning implied when these companies went to New Zealand to internationalize. They had to gain the global network. They got leverage of advanced technology, research and development, because New Zealand being one of the best dairy supply in the world. When the supply was back exported to China, the demand grew, and Yashil and Yili got their comparative advantage back. And see, we can see that milk is the white gold in the dairy industry. So in 2015, Chinese government reduced the import of milk products because there was a very surplus product which was accumulated in the Chinese market. That was because since 2008 there was a huge increase in the imports, which was products that was like in huge amounts back to China, which resulted in the surplus. So we can see that even the decrease in imports of Chinese dairy industry didn't affect any kind of export to China from New Zealand. That is because Chinese government was very supportive for their domestic firms to market and grow in their domestic region. So these firms really kept on exporting from New Zealand to China, but China decreased the imports from other countries, which drastically decreased in 2014 and back in form in 2015. Just going back a decade, it's like in 2010, China became a member of WTO, where seeing this blue graphs, where we can see most and a lot of firms enter Chinese market from 2000 till 2003, 4, and there's a slight dip because of the recession period in 2006 and 2007. And we can see that there's a lot of FDI support by the Chinese government, because China is not able to self-sustain or meet the demands of local dairy, which the domestic market is in requirement. So Chinese foreign trade, that is exports, is increasing and imports are also increasing, but running parallel. Imports are less than exports, so Chinese economy is running in the right direction for the development of their own nation. And we can see that FDI is really a very important part in the Chinese economy, because they want more and more companies to enter, which would affect and give a good growth to their GDP. Right now, the GDP doesn't matter in this graph, but yes. And I'll be passing over to Nakul to go ahead and talk about the opportunities in the Chinese dairy market. Thank you.
Well, I'll be discussing the opportunities within Chinese dairy industry. One of the aspects of Chinese 2020 policy is that the government is trying to modernize the dairy standard, and it specifies how to improve milk sources and developing standards, cattle breeding methods. This can be attained by data and online evaluation platform by producing high quality fodder for cows. It also emphasizes on the integration of dairy enterprises, promotion companies and e-commerce relation to lower down the cost while enhancing the efficiencies to increase competitiveness among the dairy industry. Moving on to the second point, government contribution to promote and subsidize safe and secure food production, as well as defining ambitious production growth targets. There are many opportunities for the companies to capitalize the gap of consumer demand. Foreign whole milk powder sources have been the center of all these details. Chinese importers have diversified the sources of dairy production supply, which help the non-Oceania milk processors and domestic producers. Coming down to the third and fourth point, as China has low per capita dairy consumption, which in turn is a good scope for dairy industry, the government has aimed to encourage increased milk intake by the children. Even with depressed global prices in China, whether fresh milk or powder are higher than world's average because of the demand of the dairy products. Coming down to the demographic factors, relaxation of one family, one child policy benefited dairy industry in a large way. Rising income, urbanization, and cultural curiosity have changed the taste and preference in China. These factors have led to the inclination of Chinese market to Western diets, which includes dairy products. Coming down to the domestic consumption, strategy to build domestic consumption and to create jobs less dependent on export market. The focus is on Chinese consumerism, which is an opportunity for Chinese dairy industry. In recent times, the industry is focused on fluid milk and will be producing and eventually exporting to Southeast Asia, which is the long-term goal and will benefit dairy industry. Even Fonterra's COO, Kelvin Wingham, stresses on pivotal role of Chinese partnership, which will play a big role for Fonterra development in China. I'll pass on to Akram. or challenges?
Thanks. So now what are we going to do is we're going to have a brief introduction about the melamine scandal which took place in the year 2008, and it has affected the Chinese dairy industry on a large scale. So starting with the melamine scandal, and then we'll further move on to the challenges which have their roots from the melamine scandal and some other challenges which arose in front of the Chinese dairy industry. So starting with the melamine scandal of 2008, which melamine is basically a chemical product which is used in production of plastic throughout the world. China is accused of using melamine chemical in the milk, especially the infant baby formulas, which is being fed to the children, and due to that, over 300,000 babies were found sick, and over 6 casualties were reported in the same year. A major Chinese dairy firm, the Sandy Group, was identified as the main culprit for the event. As the scandal unfolded, many other organizations were found to be in the spotlight of the same scandal. The Chinese government termed the suppliers and the dealers of these milk sources as the cold-blooded because of lack of ethical values and social responsibility among the Chinese dairy industry. I'm sorry. Yeah. So, firstly, discussing about the quality of dairy, which has been the main concern in the China. As China is still a developing country and milk remains prone to contamination and adulteration, the main issues lie in the quality concerns. Lack of quality control and product assurance at the milk sources has been a key ingredient in the challenge for the Chinese dairy industry. Moving ahead, because of the melamine scandal, consumers in China lost their faith from the domestic dairy products and switched from domestic products to foreign imported products. Because of this scandal, the government had faced a huge blow because they were exposed of fundamental problems in domestic dairy business and quality control as well. Moving ahead and discussing about the poor infrastructure from the rural areas, basically, as I said, China is still a developing country. The linkage from the rural to the urban areas is still quite an area where China needs to develop. Underdeveloped Chinese rural zones with poor connectivity proves to be a major issue, and basically Chinese production houses are heavily dependent on over 5,000 households from the rural areas who need to travel up to 40 kilometers a day through the poor linkages with the Chinese infrastructure. Because of these linkages, production houses need to face delays due to the poor linkages as well. Moving ahead, last but not the least, the foreign competition, which terms as the main ingredient or the main challenge for the Chinese dairy firms. After the accession of China in 2001 in WTO, over 40% of domestic and state-owned dairy farms were shut down because in the year 2009, over 100 international firms flooded into the Chinese domestic market to gain the competitive advantage of the Chinese government. Now I will pass on to Vedra for further discussion. Thank you.
Overview of the global changes in the dairy industry. The changes that are taking place is quite technical. That is why you'll see the first point here is professionalization of farming. You get a traditional farmer versus an evolving farmer. So if you're looking at a traditional farmer, the traditional farmer has a hands-on approach and is manually involved in their day-to-day farming activities. Versus your evolving farmer, you will see that points that follow are very technical. They need quite different capabilities. The evolving farmer embraces technology. Ag-tech is the name given to emerging technologies and companies that are providing new digital tools to assist farmers. These digital tools are to help the farmer with their day-to-day operations, basically to be more productive and efficient on the farm. Let me move on to trials enhancing the breeding process. The purpose for the ongoing breeding trials, the female donor is usually bred to produce superior DNA, and it is therefore believed that transferring the fertilized egg from the donor to another female will continue the elite DNA into the calves they give birth to. So this process has been tried and tested, and it's really all about maintaining elite DNA. Embryo transfer has become a game changer in both cattle breeding and the global dairy industry. Embracing new technologies, emerging technologies and datification of agriculture are providing farmers with quantifiable information continuously to measure, react and monitor day-to-day farm operations. Automation is not only transforming agriculture on the land, with the assistance of drones, it is also transforming monitoring processes from the air. Drones already assist our farmers with inspections, with monitoring pastures, livestock and water levels currently. Artificial intelligence, machine learning and machine vision are being used by equipment companies like John Deere to automatically identify, analyze and make management decisions on the farms. Last but not least, supply chain management using blockchain. Blockchain is the buzzword associated with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. So you're probably thinking, what is it doing up there? However, technology has the Bitcoin technology, which we know as blockchain, has far wider applications. It has the potential to revolutionize traceability in the food industry. In agriculture, blockchain can be used to trace a product every step of the supply chain. The decentralization of blockchain means that it can be authoritative, open, and accessible at the same time. It allows anyone to track a product's history from any point in the supply chain. So basically suppliers, you can track it basically from the farm to your plate. Deloitte in Ireland have developed a prototype and it's still in the trial stage. On this note, I hope there wasn't too much information overload. I hand over to Trishul to come through fast.
Thank you. We now move on to conclusion. As I started with, Asia is a high growth market for dairy. Changing consumer perceptions. Asian consumers are now more and more adapting themselves to Western consumption patterns. Like for example, milk drinkers are now moving towards yogurt. So we also looked at the Chinese government support that is there for the dairy industry. We looked at demographics and the macroeconomic factors of China, which gives the economies of scale for firms that want to enter China. And considering all these points, the political environment of China is something that all firms consider when entering China. The government always likes to have a strong hold on the firms that enters China, so partnerships or joint ventures is the way to go. So considering those points, innovation in packaging, processing and distribution can help firms wanting to enter China, especially in the dairy industry sector. So flexibility towards unseen market consolidation can also help firms thrive in China. As in, what the Chinese government does when certain smaller companies, if they're underperforming or not performing well, it has a tendency to put them under a larger firm which is performing well. So the perceived value of dairy products, as Nakul and Krant spoke about, the Chinese government has to work to increase the perceived value of dairy. So it should gain back the lost consumer faith which happened because of the baby formula incident, right? So China can be enhanced through innovation, process engineering, quality and of course safety. So finally, I will conclude by saying China will position itself in the upcoming years as an emerging market for dairy in the global arena. Thank you. Me and my team will now take questions.